Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. So we know how the Tories scammed us when they should have been protecting us from a deadly pandemic back in 2020. Instead of buying life-saving protective equipment from reputable and reliable suppliers, they instead set up the so-called VIP lane in order to give excessively generous contracts to friends and donors as a way of using public money to enrich themselves. Some of the PPE supplied wasn't just delayed, meaning lives lost, but unusable, meaning even more lives destroyed. But a new investigative film shows how we were actually scammed twice. The very Tories who supplied unusable PPE, but were still paid for it, charged the public purse for storage and destruction of the useless equipment. We were scammed twice. But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button to stay notified. So many people know about the abuses that took place in PPE procurement in 2020, but there's another level to it. Because this scandal has been unfolding over a period, let's begin with just a very brief timeline of how Boris Johnson and his Tory government screwed countless people. So we were told in an expose, never mind 2020, that Boris Johnson, when he'd just become Prime Minister in 2019, before anyone knew what COVID was warned that PPE stockpiles were low and needed refreshing. The stores hadn't been supplied since the last Labour government 10 years before. Equipment has a limited shelf life, right? The emergency stockpiles were becoming useless and we needed to buy more in. Boris Johnson refused. Waste of money. So the first thing to note is that we shouldn't have been in a rush to get new PPE when the pandemic hit. Frontline staff ran out, having to use bin bags to protect themselves at times, because the Tories knowingly allowed their emergency stockpiles to literally rot away. But then COVID hit, it became clear we needed to buy in huge quantities of medical equipment, including PPE or personal protective equipment, for frontline health and social care workers. But then, nothing. The government just weren't doing it. Now, this confused MPs of all political parties, including the Conservative Party. Keir Starmer, who'd just become Labour leader, asked Dominic Raab, who was deputising for Boris Johnson, who'd himself fallen ill with COVID, why they weren't rushing to procure life-saving equipment. Raab replied, Keir, silly boy, you're new to this. You don't understand, you see. The government has a duty to properly vet suppliers to make sure they were getting quality and value for money. What we found out later is that the real reason for the delay was that they were doing the opposite. They were coming up with a scheme which would all but guarantee poor quality and exceedingly bad value for public money. Instead of getting officials to order from known suppliers, they came up with a great way to make themselves rich. They called it the high priority lane. We call it the VIP lane. Anyone on the VIP lane would be fast-tracked for PPE contracts. And the way to get into this scheme was not to be a tried and tested supplier of PPE. Actual PPE companies based in Britain who were supplying governments around the world told journalists they would prioritise NHS contracts, but they hadn't had any. Instead, you got yourself into this scheme with personal contacts. So although there were some genuine suppliers in the VIP lane, it was also awash with Tory politicians, including, but not limited to, Michelle Mone, as well as personal friends of ministers and party donors. It was a stunning wheeze, wasn't it? In thanks for donating £500,000 to the Conservative Party, you get a £200 million contract for PPE, which will leave you, even once you've bought and delivered the kit, about £60 million in profit. Well, that's a stunning deal for the donor, and it's a great deal for the Tories. It's just that it left the public without protection from a deadly virus, and goodness knows how many billions out of pocket. But this new investigation just makes it even worse. Some of these VIPs, because they had zero experience of medical procurement, were allowing us to be scammed. They turned up with equipment which didn't meet the specifications. Now, ordinarily, of course, you would expect the government to refuse payment. We know they'll have given out a deposit, but to refuse payment until they'd verified that the goods were as specified. But we have to remember the point of the VIP lane was not to get medical equipment. If that was the point, it would have been proven suppliers on the list, not friends who sell knickers and bras for a living. The point of the VIP lane was to raid the public purse under cover of a national emergency. And because the whole point was to steal public money, the suppliers were paid whether their equipment was any good or not. But this latest revelation is even more sickening. I mean, We knew that taxpayers were stumping up to store and destroy the equipment as well. That's not new. Obviously, once the dodgy equipment's been supplied to the government and the government have handed over the cash and taken receipt of it, even though they shouldn't have done, and they can't use it. So obviously we know that at public expense, we're going to have to store it and then eventually destroy it. We've known for years that the cost of doing this ran to billions. And that is money we can't get back, by the way. There are like 3 forms of Tory waste here, and we can only hope to recover one of them. Where a supplier supplied the wrong or defective equipment, the government can sue them for our money back. We've seen this with the recent case against the Michelle Mone connected PPE MedPro. Now, whether we get that money back in reality is another matter, but we are legally entitled. But where a supplier supplied the correct equipment, we don't get any money back. It doesn't matter that they were paid 50% over the odds for it. Any Tory VIP who at least supplied the right kit, I mean, they were participants in corruption, but the government are allowed to pay whatever they want for stuff. Yes, there are rules that say the government should look for value for money, but there are no legal consequences for breaking those rules. And as I keep saying, a rule that's not enforced is no rule at all. So that wasted money is lost to us. And the third type of waste is the billions spent on storing and destroying defective equipment. We know we can't get that back either because the court has said so in that aforementioned PPE MedPro case. The government sued for not only the cost of the contract, but storage and destruction, but they lost that one. But what I didn't know is that the very companies who were supplying the defective equipment were also being paid by the public to store and destroy their useless kit. So the companies who handed over the right kit for like 50% above market rates, they ended up pocketing tens of millions of pounds for it. But that was it. But the companies who handed over defective equipment not only pocketed all that money, they made even more money than the ones who at least supplied what we asked for, because then they charged for storing it. This is like a bonus for being especially corrupt. I mean, yes, that's very Tory. I don't know why I'm surprised. But this is now even more disgusting. And there's nothing we can do about it. Remember, as a result of the VIP lane, it's not just that we paid too much for equipment. We often didn't get the equipment at all. And even when we did, the nature of the VIP lane meant delays in getting it. Countless frontline workers developed not just COVID, but long COVID, removing many from the workplace altogether, because they were not given the PPE they needed to protect themselves and others. The government failed on multiple counts to deal with COVID properly. But even just this one example of corruption alone, just on its own, led to more deaths in care homes, more workers suffering long-term, possibly permanent disabilities due to unnecessary repeated exposure to the virus. And then the Tories had the nerve to complain that hundreds of thousands of people left the workforce during COVID and didn't return. I wonder why. And if all that wasn't bad enough, I now learn that we didn't just have to spend more billions on storing and destroying defective equipment, which we should never have taken receipt of, but we actually gave the money for doing that to the very people who gave us the wrong shit. And the public are largely oblivious to this. Why isn't this a horizon level national scandal? Why is Boris Johnson getting paid millions of pounds a year trading off his time in government? He should be a national pariah, as should all the others who were involved in this. Dominic Raab, Matt Hancock, Michael Gove at the very least. I mean, you think about all those people whose lives have been ruined by this act of wanton corruption. Not a single person has been held to account. And too few of the public, beyond Michelle Mone, even know much about it. But let me know what you think in the comments below. And for more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.